In this lesson, we'll create a little handrail for our stairs. And in this lesson, we'll look at how we can create some simple picture frames. And in this lesson, we'll create the doorknob for the door and attach it. Alright, so just as kind of a little detail, let's add a short handrail going up these steps. So to do this, I'm going to go into the front view, and you can see right here the steps. So this is the area that I want to add this. So I'm going to go ahead and create a piece of geometry, and let's create an extended primitive, and let's create a chamfer box. So go ahead and drag this out about the length that I want. Go ahead and drag out a little bit of height, and then we can drag out kind of the fillet on the edges. Okay, let's go ahead and now move this over into position, roughly. Okay, and then we can play with the kind of the parameters that we have here. So I'm going to go into the modify panel. Okay, the width I think is probably good. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit wider. Okay, the length I think is probably okay. Let's go ahead and dial down the height quite a bit, and let's take that fillet down to something more like that. Okay, so it's a bit thinner. All right. And now let's go ahead and just kind of move it a little bit closer to the wall. And now I want to actually skew this down a little bit. Okay, so I don't want to just rotate it. I want these sides to remain kind of flat. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and add a skew modifier. So we're going to go down to skew. You can hit S if you want to come down there. And this will give you parameters for the amount and also the direction. So you can play with the different axes. Okay, so you can see if I do this with the default, you can see how that skews things. If I turn on X, you can see what that skews. I'm going to actually use X, but I'm going to turn the direction 90 degrees. And that will allow me to go in and actually skew this. Again, I want to kind of, you can see how that's remaining straight. I want to match up the skew with the kind of the angle of the steps. So I'll go ahead and skew that. Maybe I've got about 1 foot, 8 inches or so, and that will give you that sort of effect. Okay, it's not quite as impressive on this because you can just come in and take these points and kind of move those, but it's more of a soft transition here when you get down to where some of these larger points are. It's a little bit better of a transition, and if you had something that was a little bit higher res, then you would definitely notice the difference a little bit more. So now you want to go ahead and move this into the correct spot there. And let me just select this guy, maybe move it up a little bit so that it's in the right spot. And now if we want to actually connect that to the wall, we can just go in here and create a couple of cylinders to do that. So we got maybe a bolt right there. Okay. Go ahead and move that into position, into the wall there, and you're going to make it long enough so that it kind of penetrates in. Okay, and then you can maybe add one more down here. Get a copy of that and just drop that in. So you get something like that. So one of those things that's very simple to do, but putting it in there just kind of adds a little bit to the room when you see some of these things, little details in here. So the more of those things that you can add, obviously we only have a certain amount of time to start putting the little details in, but you can just take it and run with it and start adding any little details that you want to add. Next lesson, so in the next, go ahead and over here on the door, we have yet to add a doorknob to this guy. So let's go ahead and add a doorknob and set that up so that we can actually rotate that door with the doorknob and everything attached. So the first thing we're going to do is create geometry for this. So I'm going to go ahead and create just a plate first. So create a box, and I'm going to turn on auto grid so I can just draw this directly onto the door. So I'll just go ahead and draw this right onto that door and just pull out a little bit of thickness there, kind of like that. You can always go in and now change the parameters there, so maybe dial that in just a little. Okay, and I can convert this to an editable poly and select that polygon, and we can go ahead and bevel that out. Okay, give that kind of a smaller bevel. Just something kind of like that maybe. And this can be kind of scaled down a little bit too if you want to. Maybe this whole thing's a little bit too big. Kind of scale that down. And now we can create our actual doorknob. Alright, so to do this, I am going to just create a sphere. And again with AutoGrid, I'll just draw it onto this guy. Go ahead and pull this in there. Let's go ahead and pull this out a little bit. Alright. And now we can go ahead and now pull this geometry out. So I'm going to dial the segments down to something a little bit more manageable. Maybe something like 12 or so. And then let's go ahead and convert this to an editable poly and select these polygons on the back. And let's go ahead and now extrude those out. Okay. And I don't want those to go quite so far, so I'll go ahead and pull that in. Say OK, and then I'll just delete those polygons. Now I'm going to take these vertices up here just for the knob, and let's go ahead and scale those up in Z so we get kind of a more interesting shape there. Okay, and we can turn it a little bit if we want to. So now how do we attach this to the door? Because the door is a parametric shape at this point. Well, let's go ahead and convert this into a polygon. So we'll go ahead and say convert to editable poly, and you can see that now we've got our door as an editable poly, but we need to now select the actual door and then the window inside there. So we'll select both of those as elements, go to edit geometry, and detach those. So we'll go ahead and detach those. So now that gives us this piece right in here. So now we can either combine, we can either attach, or we can link these pieces up. So to link, simply select the cube here, and also, or the box, and also the doorknob, and then we'll go to select and link, and I'll just drag from the child to the parent, and then from this over to this. So now if I go ahead and select this and move it around, that follows along. But let's look and see what happens if I rotate this. It's not really rotating how I want it to, so we need to actually modify the pivot just slightly. So I'm going to go into the top view, and you can see right here is the pivot, and we want to move it. So I'm going to go to the hierarchy panel, say Effect Pivot Only, go to Move, and let's now move it up to the front edge of that door, kind of right in there. You can see where that is. Go ahead and turn that off. And now, if we go ahead and rotate this, you can see it actually rotates fairly well. And we've got the knob and the plate kind of following along with it. Alright, so there's a quick way to add the door and the doorknob. If you want to move these around, you can still go in and select those and move those around if you want to, scale them, whatever. And it's still going to be linked so that when you grab this, you'll be able to move this around. Okay, so now that we've got the doorknob, let's go ahead and start to finish things up. We'll create some quick picture frames. We'll simply start with the actual planes that we want to act as our pictures. So we'll go ahead and draw out a standard primitive plane. We'll go ahead and draw that out into the viewport. Alright, so now we can actually use this to create our frame. So let's say that this is going to be the actual picture. So let's go ahead and extract the edges from this. So go ahead and create an editable poly. Okay, and let's go ahead and select the edges. Okay, so I'll just select all of these guys all the way around. And let's go ahead and extract that shape, or create shape from selection, and we can make a linear shape out of that. And you see I've got the rendering already on. So what's happening is you can see instead of creating just a spline, it's actually, you can see that sort of geometry around there. So let's go ahead and select that spline, and we'll go to rendering, and here you can see what we've got. Okay, so we can play around with the thickness of this. You could also use this spline, you could do a sweep and create a more interesting shape. Okay, you could do a loft, same type of thing. You can dial down the sides here if you want to do that, if you want something more like that, if you want something thicker, come in. So you have a lot of flexibility using your curves like this, or using your splines. You could also create kind of a rectangular frame if you wanted to. Okay, I kind of like the radial frame though. And now with this, let's say this is going to be our actual picture. So let's say we want a kind of a glass frame in front of this. Well, we can just hold down Shift, pull this up, and this can actually be the glass. Okay, so if we go into our material editor, we have this transparent material, so we can just pop that on there, and now we've got a sort of glass frame, and you can see that behind there. You can apply your picture to the actual plane back here, and then have your glass in front. Very simple way to do that. Okay, so let's say we want to now just take all of these and attach them or combine them together. We can go ahead and just group those, and we can call this frame. Okay, and then we can come in here and go ahead and move it into position. Okay, and then we'll just kind of arrange these. We'll go ahead and spin this around. Okay, and then we can kind of arrange these onto the wall however we want them. Okay, so maybe I'll have a kind of a large one right in here. Maybe something like that. And then we can go ahead and duplicate this over, copy that. Maybe that's a bit, this one's a bit smaller. Maybe it's up here. And maybe we have a kind of a smaller one down here as well. A lot of times they'll tell you to kind of arrange things in 3s or 5s and kind of avoid even numbers when you're designing. It's all obviously depends on what you're doing, but and then maybe we want to put one over here, and we'll just kind of rotate that around. One other thing that you could do would be to kind of put the pivot point up where it would actually be hanging. So right now it's pivoting from the center. Okay, so if you wanted to actually kind of be able to move these very quickly from the point where they would be hanging from, you know, all you have to do is come in and move that pivot. Okay, so let me see, I want to come in from the front here and go into the hierarchy and just move that pivot point maybe up here, and then whenever you rotate this, it's actually rotating from that point, and you can just kind of make this off kilter just a little bit. Okay, you probably want it to be pretty straight, but that's, you know, one thing that you can do to kind of roughen it up a little bit. So that's just a kind of a real quick way to create a picture frame without having to go in and create the different the geometry along the edges if you don't have time for that. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do, and in fact the last thing that we're going to do, is just add some simple rugs to the floor. Okay, so very, very simple. They're pretty flat, but we can add a little bit of, you know, roughness to those in the same way we modified the couch to add a lot to our scene.